Good morning. It's April 13th, 2022. Welcome to Triggered. It's also the sixth wave. Are you going to be okay? Yes, that's it. Our head doctor is warning us all. And of course, the complicit mainstream media is jumping on the bandwagon. We are in the midst of the sixth wave. It's getting to the point, though, I think, where we're not even noticing the waves coming anymore. But we'll see. Watch out, guys. The zombie apocalypse could be coming anytime now. The closest thing to an apocalypse we've really got going, actually, is the weather as we go into our second winter. It's snowy and miserable in Calgary, though. When we look at the images coming out of our poor neighbors in Saskatchewan and Manitoba out there, I guess we've got it pretty good out here. Hopefully that's that last blast. I'm trying to look at the bright side. We're getting some moisture in the ground for our much troubled agricultural producers out there before planting season. By the way, just a reminder, so I'm Cory Morgan, the host of today's show. And I'm going to end the show, and I may as well start it by reminding everybody Danielle Smith has come on. I know that's to mixed reviews to a lot of people, but we're going to have more content to watch. And hey, Danielle was great when she was on radio. She covers some subjects fantastically. I mean, of course, she can speak and talk to these issues. Tune in. Her first show is going to be Monday morning at 9 o'clock a.m. next Monday. And she'll be going Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, and Saturdays in the mornings. Our show, live every day, 11:30 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, Monday to Friday, except this Friday because of the holiday. I'll be at the gun show out on the reserve on Friday, though, so along with the Western Standard setup. So comments, the reminder, this being a live show, I like to always remind everybody, let's interact, let's get on there. Send those comments. I see all you guys checking in, Dash and Brad and Ashley and Bud. And chat with each other, send questions to my guests. I won't necessarily get them all out to them, but I can get some of them, and it gives me ideas sometimes, gives me questions to ask them, send me topics. It's great. It's the discourse. This is why we do it live, even though live comes with technical challenges and makes it more difficult. It's just much better to be able to go back and forth. So keep it coming, guys. I appreciate it. And again, just try to keep it somewhat civil, though. We don't have to be scrapping there. Today, it's going to be kind of a big independence leaning going on, though I know a lot of our viewers like that. It's going to be the leader of the Buffalo Party of Saskatchewan, Philip Zajac, and he's going to come on as my first guest a little later. And then Rob Anderson of the Free Alberta Strategy. Again, now the Alberta Strategy isn't a party, it's a group, and it's promoting, though, independence and independence-minded sort of thing. So we'll have a lot of that leaning today. I'm going to play a clip later on from Pierre Poilievre's rally I went to last night. It was quite something else, and then we'll talk about that a bit. And for now, though, let's bring things a little close to home and talk about the fear, the masking. Well, the rallying cry of the terrified as they demand government lockdowns and mandatory masking is that we must follow the science. Well, if only they would. Now, NDP leader Rachel Notley raised the ire of the COVID-0 cultists among her supporters the other day when she dared to smile and hold a baby at an event. How dare she show humanity and enjoy life for a moment? You see, while there's no mandates or laws against holding babies while unmasked, the unwritten rules of the cancel mob say you mustn't. As with Ryan Jesperson, who nearly lost his show due to a cancel mob, the people coming for Notley with their torches lit and their pitchforks waving are actually her own supporters. It makes it hard to feel sorry for people when they reap a bit of what they've sown. We can hope, though, that Ryan and Rachel are learning from these incidents, though. So let's get back to the science and let's see just how much risk Rachel Notley put that baby into by holding it so recklessly like that and smiling at it. Well, we're into our third year of the pandemic, and we have statistics now to look at. So we can see who indeed is truly vulnerable to COVID-19 and who isn't. So the death count for children under 1 year of age, the child in the category that Rachel Notley was holding, the death count so far statistically is 0. Over 2 years, 0. Even if Notley put that baby at 100 times the risk of COVID in her moment of holding it, the chances of the baby dying due to that would still statistically remain at 0. So why are we going so nuts? Well, not us, but her supporters. So let's go further. Of the 20,000 cases recorded among children between the ages of 1 and 4 in the last couple of years, 1 passed away. And that was a child with serious comorbidities. And while it's not something we like to dwell on, the child was unfortunately probably not long for this earth in any circumstances. There was a lot of health issues going on, and no amount of masking or restrictions would have saved that poor little person. Those kind of numbers continue right up until the age of 19. Under 19 of 100,000 reported cases. Remember, reported. A lot of the young people didn't even report or get tested. They just shook off their flu and moved on. So of that 100,000 under 19, 4 died. 4. Those victims suffered under, all of those 4, by the way, again, suffered under a number of other serious comorbidities and ailments. Fewer than 1 in 1,000 of them even needed medical intervention. They weren't hospitalized or had to see doctors. Yet this is what we're losing it over, guys. Statistically, kids are more likely to die in traffic accidents than they are of COVID-19. We aren't going to ban motor vehicles anytime soon, though admittedly some would like us to. So statistically, the pattern is clear as day. You don't need to be a microbiologist or a medical doctor or a statistician in order to see the pattern of COVID-19. The young are nearly invulnerable, and it gets more dangerous as we age and among the aged. So out of 4.4 million citizens in Alberta over 2 years of the pandemic, fewer than 70 people under 40 died of COVID-19. Remember that, 2 years. 4.4 million people. How much of the population is under 40? 70 of them died of COVID-19. Again, they were all sick with other conditions. They keep trying to feed us this lie that healthy people are getting killed by this. They are not. There's some extreme outliers once in a blue moon, but again, you got a better chance of getting struck by lightning. It isn't until about over the age of 60 when COVID fatalities start getting into higher figures. So over the last 2 years, we had 1,500 deaths of people over 60 years old. And many more than that died of other causes in the province, of course, with over 4 million people. As with prior deaths, most of those who passed of COVID-19 already had serious comorbidities. Now, once we get past the age of 80, that's where over 50% of the COVID-19 fatalities are. Now, being over 80 in itself is something of a comorbidity. I mean, when you consider the life expectancy in Canada is 82. People over 80 can get taken out by any number of causes, and COVID is just one of many. We're at the tail end at that point, folks. I mean, we want people to live as long as possible, absolutely. But COVID is not the scourge they're trying to make it out to be. This isn't an effort to dismiss COVID-19. This is just doing what we've been told to for years and following the science. So for what's been framed as the worst plague seen since the Spanish flu, COVID isn't really that relatively dangerous, especially to younger people. Now let's look at some other numbers. 1,700 people died of overdoses in 2021 alone. In 1 year, 1,700. And that was in Alberta, and most of them were young. So if we really want to save young lives, this is where we need to be looking. COVID-19 is virtually harmless to babies. So let's give Notley a break here. And let's hope we're hitting a tipping point. Maybe Notley and some of her supporters will start seeing the consequences of years of politically motivated fear-mongering with COVID-19. They might realize the cult of irrational pandemic fear that they've created and fed. Perhaps they'll also realize how unforgiving those cancel mobs are. They fostered them, and they can see how quickly those mobs will turn on them when given a chance. These are likely all vain hopes on my part, but one can dream. We can fault Rachel Notley with many things, and I do like pointing them out. Her taking a moment to safely hold and enjoy a perfectly healthy baby, though, isn't one of them. Let's start following the science, people. We can't pretend that we don't have the numbers anymore. Stop the fear and stop the canceling and swarming. That's what's got me going today. Okay, let's get on to some news with our news director, Dave Naylor. Hey, Dave, how's it going?
It's going well, Cory. It's weird to see the left turn on their own, isn't it? I guess they must have run out of things to cancel on the right.
I guess.
Yeah, so some interesting news on the site at the moment. We're taking a look at a new Liberal Trudeau imposed tax on pickup truck owners in Calgary, or in Alberta, sorry. It's going to add thousands of dollars to anybody who wants to buy a pickup truck these days. And I don't know, Cory, with the insurance or the interest rates going up a full percent today and the full 0.5% on the price of gas, I'm not sure who can afford them anyways. So we do have our Mike Thomas, real estate expert. He's done a story on the 0.5 percentage point increase this morning announced by the Bank of Canada, blaming the war in the Ukraine. And it's the largest single day jump in probably 20 some years. We've got the Muslim Association of Canada. They are suing the Canada Revenue Agency, saying that they're being audited and they're calling it a case of bias and Islamophobia against charges against the CRA. This is for an ongoing audit that's been going back for years. Those poor people in Saskatchewan hunkered down in the storm, can be comforted with the fact that Sask Power has raised their rates 8%. That was announced in Saskatchewan. So when they go and turn on their heat or turn on their appliances, keep that in your back of your mind, 8% more. Our Saskatchewan reporter Christopher has also got a story on the Saskatchewan Teachers Federation. They want masks brought back into schools in the province immediately. They're concerned about high rates of COVID and wastewater. At the moment, the government says, those things go up and down, and there's no need for masks in schools now. But the Teachers Federation are continuing the fear-mongering, I guess. We've got a story on the COVID-19 vaccines. The feds are now saying they're only good for about 150 days. So that's they're urging everybody to get their booster shots as quickly as they can. So we got lots more to come this afternoon. Cory, how did Jane like the Poilievre rally?
Oh, she liked it. I mean, I dragged her to those things. As I'd said, actually, that was our very first date together. I dragged poor Jane to a Stephen Harper rally. It was for a federal election many years ago, I think 17 or 18 years ago. She must have liked it a little bit because she still hung around with me and still comes out to those things. But she was still pretty tired by the end of it. It's a long time to be standing.
It is, and it started more than an hour late.
Yes.
Cars backed up for kilometers on the highway trying to get in. So are you taking Jane to the gun show?
I don't know if Jane will be interested in coming out to that, but though she's certainly welcome. I mean, the traffic won't be as bad. That was the other thing with trying to get out of the parking lot after the Poilievre rally. I mean, getting in was hours, and getting out, we sat in the car for 20 minutes. And I mean, I tried to get, I thought we're parked, it's dark, we should try and, look back in time and get a little frisky, but Jane shut that down as well. So I'm not sure how much more luck I'll have bringing her out to a gun show, but we'll see.
All right. Well, good luck with that.
Great. Thanks, Dave. I'll talk to you later. Yes, we cover all sorts of news. I'll probably be in crap with Gene when I get home, but that's hardly news. All right. So, yes, lots of things breaking and going on. Energy, as Dave was talking about some costs, I saw a story that popped up, and it was talking about how an expert, there's always these experts, I think it was CBC that wrote on it, was talking about how Alberta overbuilt its electricity infrastructure, and that's why our bills are so high. Now, there's where we get some truth and lies out of things. Yes, that's part of why we're paying for a whole bunch of infrastructure on this, but they forget to mention that the reason we built a whole lot of that infrastructure is because we're bringing in all these magical windmills and solar projects. That's a part of the infrastructure too, and those costs are getting passed down to us. The other thing too is, how can you guys on the left be complaining about us overbuilding electrical infrastructure when we don't have nearly the infrastructure required to transition to power millions of electrical vehicles like the federal government is trying to force us to do? We're going to have to overbuild. We're going to have to overbuild the transmission lines right now because we can't build them in a week or two. We can't build them. I mean, we're looking at 8 years. Apparently, we're all going to be in electric cars here. So we'd better get that stuff going. But the CBC, you see, you can't win with them. They complain. They get their experts to complain that we built too much electrical infrastructure. Yet at the same time, they support idiotic government initiatives trying to force us into electric vehicles that we don't want, that we can't afford, that aren't efficient, and we don't have the generational power to power. How do you win in this province? Well, for one, by not listening to the state broadcaster, quit listening to CBC and their experts. It's all crap. But energy, our bills are going up, and it's very expensive. Something that's not expensive, I'll do our self-plug and remind everybody of that, as I always do after Dave lists out all those stories we're covering across the country. We do that because we are independent, and we are independent because we have subscribers. And I want to thank everybody who has already subscribed to the Western Standard. That's how we pay our bills. That's how we don't have to answer to the government or lobby groups or anything like that. It's pure capitalism. If our content stunk, you guys will unsubscribe and we'll go away. As it is, we've been growing. It's been going fantastic. So again, thank you all who have subscribed. And if you guys haven't subscribed already, get on there, westernstandardonline.com, take out a membership. $10 a month. If you use the coupon code TRIGGERED, coupons are always great these days. We all want to save a few bucks. Use the code TRIGGERED. You'll save $10. And if you take it out for a year, it's $99 a year. I mean, you're saving some really good money here, paying less than you used to for an old newspaper subscription and getting all of this content, plus a lot of original content, columns, opinion content, news. And then we can keep spreading out too, getting more reporters, getting out to these events. As I said, we were out at the Poilievre event the other night. It went really well. It was. I'll talk a little bit about that after the next guest, and we'll show some video from there because it was really something else. And yeah, so let's talk about, and I'll hit as well while I'm at it, one of our sponsors. And yes, that is Bitcoin Well. These guys have been a very good sponsor to us, and this is what am I saying? This is something that helps hedge your bets and get away from the conventional monetary banks and currencies. And I mean, Bitcoin Well is a Western Canadian company. They're out here. And one of their hallmarks, their most important things, they give one-on-one service. Like, people are always worried about being ripped off, and I don't blame them. There seems like there's a million people out there always trying to steal the money you earn. Well, so people are worried about getting into digital currencies because it sounds so vague and unusual. They're a publicly traded company, and they will offer one-on-one in-person service. None of this call center on the other side of the country, not a email or a PDF with how to do it. You can set up an appointment and meet a person face-to-face, and they will guide you through the process of getting yourself involved in digital currencies with Bitcoin. You don't get that anywhere else. And then this is how you can feel safe about it. This is a real established company, and they offer all sorts of things, ways you could pay your bills and credit cards, the savings plan so you can save a little Bitcoin on the side, how to get your wallet set up, how to transfer into it. Check them out. I'll talk a little bit more about them later. BitcoinWell.com. These guys help you take control of your money. And that's what's important, because we got a lot of other people that are trying to take control of your money on your behalf, and you usually lose when they do that. I see a commenter from LinkedIn was mentioning that the Standard should accept donations by cryptocurrencies. Those are outlast the Canadian dollar. Yeah, it might. And I'm not sure. I'm not in the tech area, but I'm sure that we'll be at a point soon where we will be able to take cryptocurrency. I don't see why not, digital currencies. So things are moving along. Pamela Jones-Kenny asking, is the Western Standard going to be affected by this government licensing like the Rebel News? By the way, I'm planning a special. I might as well plug that. We're going to be recording it probably next week, where I'm going to do a show with myself and Sheila Gunn-Reid from Rebel News and Andrew Lawton from True North. And all three of us, it's just a cumulative show together, are going to talk about that and other things and pressures on alternative media and government control of it. Ourselves, Derek actually, and he wrote a column on that. We applied and qualified. I mean, Rebel got rejected, we qualified. I'm not trying to hire a low horse. I mean, the joke of it all is it's not the government's role to determine who is a legitimate media outlet or who isn't. The reason we applied was to make a point. And Derek went through the whole process, and it was quite a process. And at the end of it, they said, oh, congratulations, you're a Trudeau-approved outlet. You are real news in our eyes. So here's all the forms now so you can apply for subsidies. And Derek said, no, we're not interested. What do you mean you're not interested? We're not interested. We just did it to see if we could. And I guess the bureaucrat he was talking to got quite upset, actually, when, what was the point? Why'd you put us through all that? Well, we just wanted to see if you'd approve us. And the thing is, with that joke of a thing, once you have their approval, once you become dependent upon them calling you an official media outlet, what's to stop them from yanking the rug out from under you later if they don't like something else you did? It's not an advantage being determined by the federal government as real news or not real news. It's not their job. That's the last arbiter of who should be allowed to broadcast or print, or who should be considered a legitimate source or not. We are in a very, very scary place right now. There was a journalist, I think it was from The Guardian in the UK, and I'd seen a headline with that, and she was pointing out, like, Trudeau is determining who's media and who's not. Overseas people are looking at it like, you guys in Canada are insane, and she's right. And again, we're being embarrassed. But I mean, people don't understand the threats to our liberties, to our freedoms. It's not just self-serving with us as a alternative media outlet. I mean, free press is a hallmark. It's a fundamental right in any democratic nation. You have to leave it unfettered. It doesn't mean you like everything that they put out, that they publish, that they do, but you just stay out of it. You can't have the government start pushing and pulling. That's getting back into Soviet-style politics, and we don't need Pravda. It's bad enough that we got the CBC taking $1.5 billion dollars every year, but now they really want to reach out and control every other media outlet in Canada. It's dangerous, it's problematic, and we have to stand up to it. Okay, let's bring our guest in. This is somebody standing up to Ottawa and speaking from an independence-minded perspective in Saskatchewan, and this is the new leader of the Buffalo Party of Saskatchewan, Philip. Now I'm terrible with Eastern European names. Zajac. How shall we pronounce that so I know next time, Philip? Phil seems to have frozen there.
The right Zajac is the right. You're real close.
Okay. I don't want to insult anybody, but it's just better just to ask, I think. So I guess just to give a bit of a rundown, you guys are running a provincial party, of course, in Saskatchewan. You made a bit of a splash as a new independent sort of minded party in the last provincial election, and even with a limited number of candidates. You finished third overall, and a few strikingly strong finishes in a number of constituencies out there. But now you're into the post-election doldrums, and I've worked with newer and up-and-coming parties. It's always difficult at that time, to keep everything rolling. And so you're organizing and move things along, and you are recently been elected as the new leader then, right?
Yep, that's correct. We had a leadership race a couple weeks ago, and so I'm the first officially elected leader of the Buffalo Party. And I just want to state, that we are not a separatist party. We are a fair deal for people of Saskatchewan party. I think that our number one goal is to achieve a similar or better deal than what Quebec has received from the federal government. And I think that's our main job. I don't want people to start to push us into that corner that's our only objective is to separate, because that's not it at all. It's a mantra that because we're going to start to scare people, they're going to try and swing people away from us because they think that's our goal, and that's absolutely not it.
Yeah, also, fair enough. That's why I was using the term independence repeatedly, because that can apply to a number of things, aside from looking to actually break away from the Confederation.
Yeah. I was watching your on the before I came on today, and it's appalling the lack of. You were talking about the communist type of media coverage that's going on in Canada. When the federal government removes the media from a peaceful event that's happening in the city where the government operates, it's an atrocity. How can you? The only reason you remove their media is if something wrong is happening. I don't understand what's happening in Ottawa anymore, and it's just time for us to regroup and take a serious look at making things better for the West.
Yeah. So in looking at a Western focused, and of course particularly Saskatchewan focused parties, what sort of policy initiatives are you looking at then to increase, as I said, more whilst within Confederation, but more independence or autonomy of strength, I guess is a good way to put it. Where are you guys looking to move with that?
Yeah, our core plan is to basically take over our own immigration, take over our own taxation, to end payments to the East under equalization. It's the problem that's just been broken for a long time, and it just can't continue. The fact that when Saskatchewan and Alberta economies are struggling and we're still saving money in equalization doesn't make any sense. The taxation, we see that the federal government is spending our money all over the world. It's money that we don't have. And not just my, but their child and their child and their child will be paying for it. And so that's why we want to take over our own taxation. I think our mantra right now is common sense politics, and that's where we need to get back to. None of the people that are in this party are lifetime politicians. We're just people that care about Saskatchewan, and we want a good deal for the people here.
Yeah, well, in Western provinces, I think particularly Saskatchewan and Alberta are going to be very vulnerable, in my view, in the next couple of years, because we have clearly with the Ukraine-Russia crisis going on. I mean, Ukraine food prices are definitely going to shoot up. That's one of the biggest providers of food sources and agricultural products in Europe. And that's going to impact Saskatchewan, plus the energy prices. I mean, Saskatchewan being a potash producer, agricultural producer, very resource-based, which is going to be actually kind of, good for the Saskatchewan economy. But whenever Western provinces do well, quite often the central government kind of wants to scoop in and take a bite out of that.
Well, and we know that's true, and the other part that, is happening, which everybody's seen as of April here, the carbon tax has gone up again, which again is the federal government. How do we take more money away from the hardworking people in Saskatchewan? It's your farmers, your business owners, everybody is paying more in carbon tax now, and we know that number one, the world needs carbon. We breathe carbon, and Saskatchewan is essentially a carbon neutral province, right? With again, this is just another issue that, as the Buffalo Party, we're going to end the carbon tax. We have a way to do it, and it's just we're not going to say it because the Sask Party keeps cannibalizing our policy, which is nice because it's just showing that we're an effective opposition, even though we're not in government.
Yeah, I mean, in some senses, as a pragmatist, a person, hey, as long as it's getting done, it doesn't really matter who's doing it. But still, then I imagine there are areas and shortcomings with the Saskatchewan Party or Sask Party and Premier Moe that you guys feel can't be repaired, and thus the need for another party, right?
Yeah, like it's. I think the Saskatchewan's been looking for an alternative. We've seen over the past 10 years that the NDP really does no opposition in the legislature. There's lots of things that you can do as a party to keep the pressure on the sitting party, even if you don't have a majority of the votes. And we just haven't seen that from the NDP in terms of challenging the Sask Party on a lot of the things that have happened here recently. And that's something that we will do vigilantly, and we're already starting to do. And we don't have anybody sitting in the MLA.
Yeah, well, and I've talked about that in the past. I've been involved again in a lot of up and coming parties, and people say, well, why do you do it? And people forget that they could still serve a purpose. I mean, the goal is always you're going to run to win seats. You're looking to get in there. But if you're gaining steam, if you're gaining momentum, you are going to impact the current policymakers, or at least they're going to be wise if they allow it to impact them. If they don't let it impact them, they will get replaced. And if you only have pressure coming from one direction, the party in power is only going to go in one direction. So having multiple perspectives in opposition is very important.
Yeah. No, and I think that as a team, we have some fantastic ideas for the province. We have some fantastic ideas how we're going to grow this economy and not tax the people. Saskatchewan, the Sask Party right now has no ideas of how to make things better here. So the only thing they can do is tax everything they possibly can, and we saw that in the last budget. They've gone down to taxing people's gym memberships now. So they want you to be healthy and stay out of the hospital system and the medical system by staying in shape, but we're going to throw a tax on your gym membership that you and your child and every single person pays in the province. So when you have no ideas and no creativity, taxing is your only solution, and it's not the way to grow the economy here.
Yeah. So again, there's a lot of parallels that somebody's been pointing out with sort of like the Wild Rose Party in Alberta and things like that. Very much looking out, regionally. One of the things we do here, and I'm wondering if there's going to be any motivation to move that way, is we go through the motions, at least, of electing senators. It doesn't fix the system, but at least we get to pick and have some say in who might be appointed on our behalf later. And I've been interviewing a number of the Conservative leadership candidates, and so far, aside from Charest, he kind of talked around it. The others all committed, said they would appoint our elected senators. Is Saskatchewan ever going to consider doing that sort of initiative?
Yeah, we have. It's right in our constitution that and our foundation that we would prefer that our senators be elected. I think that it's when you're appointing people in that position of government, again, it's the buddy system, and it's not fair in democratic politics. It should be open to a vote, and that's something that we plan to do as a party, and once we take control of government here. We also just another thing that is part of our. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Cory.
Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to say we also have something in our policy that is unique. We are going to set term limits on how long you can actually be a representative in government, and we're going to install a recall process because it doesn't matter. This is just common sense again. If you do poorly in your job and you don't do what's needed to be done for your position, you lose your job. So there needs to be, we're going to install a recall process so that if you're not representing your community the way that the community feels they need to be represented, they can start a recall process, and the MLA will have to defend themselves in that process.
Yeah, and it's about time there's some accountability between elections. That's something that people, of course, are always concerned with. Has there been more of a breakdown, though, on exactly how that policy would work? Like that, just to show a parallel, Jason Kenney campaigned on that, and then they gave us a recall policy. But what they did was they set the bar so high to initiate it that it's never actually going to happen. So the nuts and bolts of the policy are as important as the principle of it. Have you guys been formulating sort of some of the mechanisms of it?
Yeah, we when you look at that number, you don't want it to be a willy-nilly number where people can just do it because you've got half of the community upset. But it is over 60%. Is what we're looking at for a number. Somewhere in that range, and then again after that, if it does pass, that there is the recall, the candidate would have the opportunity to rerun in the election, right? So it's a big commitment to take the position as leader or as an MLA. It also is a big commitment to represent your community properly. So it has to be hand in hand, and the candidate obviously won for a reason the first time. So if they do get recalled, they do have the opportunity to rerun.
Great. So at this point, I imagine you guys are working on organizing local, is it still called constituency associations in Saskatchewan, the provincial equivalent, I guess, of an EDA? Like you're getting your ground organization together at this point, I imagine.
Yeah, we've had the board has had a very solid plan of how we were going to go forward. Number one was to get to our first AGM, to get an elected board and elected representatives. The previous board was all appointed and volunteers. We also passed our constitution, so we have and it's a posted constitution that we were very proud of, and I think that it sets a good framework, for the party for the next 100 years. The next step was to have the leadership election, which was a very smooth process for us, and we got that done and out of the way. Next, at the end of May now, our next step is our policy and governance convention. We've had over 100 submissions, by members that are very concerned about policy and how they want to see the party represent them going forward, which I think is fantastic. This is not and I've said this before, this is not an autocratic type of government. We are a bottom-up driven party, and the members have a big say in what happens. And so all this policy is getting accumulated right now, and on the 29th of May, we'll be having the Policy and Governance Convention in Regina. Once the policy is completed and voted on, then we go into the next step of building, we call them constituency associations here, and then of course candidate retention after that.
Yeah, it's quite a process. You're still, I guess, at this point about 3 years from your next provincial election that you would expect, or 2.5?
Yeah, it's about 2, 2 and a little bit. They could call it, anytime between 1.5 and 2.5, but I'm sure it won't be till near the end. So it's a good, like I said, we have a good plan, and we're just putting our strategic plan together and making sure that we're doing it the right way.
Excellent. Well, where can then I direct people to make sure they can keep up with the events, find out the details for your convention coming up, and get involved in general?
Yep, if it's you can just go to Buffalo Party SK.ca and go to our webpage. You can sign up right there. You have to be a member before the 13th of May. The reason we do a cutoff is because we have to set a time, and we have to set for the place where we're holding the event, we need to have numbers, right? So basically it's 2 weeks before. You have to be a member if you want to come to the event and vote for policy and how this party is going to move forward. We have a lot of passionate people in our membership, and it's exciting to see the thoughtfulness and the submissions that we've received already.
Great. Well, I really appreciate you coming on today to give us an update on the party. As I said, it really caught a lot of people's interest in the last provincial election, sort of out of the blue, and did more, did better. If people familiar with provincial politics should understand that's quite an impact for a new party with a small number of candidates. There's clearly a seed of something going on there, and I'm looking forward to seeing how you guys develop in the days to come.
Well, thanks, Cory. It was really exciting for us too. All the candidates worked hard. We ran in 17 ridings, and we still finished third overall in the election. So just imagine what's going to happen when we run in 61 ridings in the next one.
Well, we're looking forward to watching that develop as it comes. So thanks again. Maybe we'll check in after your meeting and see how things are going with the party later on.
Okay. Thanks, Cory. Have a great day. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So yes, that was from the Buffalo Party of Saskatchewan, Phil Zajac, I didn't listen the first time when he corrected me. And yeah, they're organizing and they're hitting the ground running out in Saskatchewan. As I said, I watched that in the provincial election. I've taken part in, forming of small parties and getting things rolling. And to have a kickoff for a new party like that was pretty good. As I mentioned at the start too, though, the doldrums, the difficult time is between elections. Then it's hard to get the interest. It's hard to get the donors. It's hard to get people to meetings, but it's very important because you need to build that basis and that infrastructure if you really want to contest the next election when the time comes, because it'll sneak up on you faster than you anticipate at times. So let's see. I'm going to get onto some federal issues here, actually, and talk about, I went to Pierre Poilievre's rally last night down in Spruce Meadows in Calgary, and boy, was it ever something else. So I'm going to kick it off with a clip from the rally, from Mr. Poilievre's speech, and I'll talk a little bit more about what I observed and what I concluded out of that.
If one person gets more control, then someone else has to get less control, right? There's only so much to go around. And that's why when government gets big and bossy and powerful, people start turning on each other. Can you remember a time when we've ever been this divided? East versus West? Vaccinated versus unvaccinated? I can't remember a time when people were turning on each other in this way. But it is you're right, when his dad was Prime Minister, I remember I was a kid here in Alberta, and it was pretty bad then too, wasn't it? The same thing happened. Big, powerful, controlling government turned people against each other. Before Trudeau I, there was no separatist movement in Quebec, and all of a sudden it came alive. Before Trudeau II, separatism was dead in Quebec and not even spoken of in Alberta. And now that he's been in power for 7 years, we have 2 regions where there are separatist movements alive and well. Unfortunately, well, listen, I understand why you feel that way. I understand the frustration of being a Western Canadian and feeling like your central government is attacking you. I get it. But I want to tell you something else. You have many friends right across this country who are on your side. I meet them every single day who believe in this country and who believe in all of its people, who want to build pipelines across the nation. The Energy East pipeline would have gone right through my riding, and 2/3 of my constituents were happy to support it right there in Ottawa. I want you to know that. And with a Poilievre government who's born and bred in Alberta, you will know that the era of calling Alberta and Western Canada to pay up and shut up will be over forever.
So yeah, that was a clip out of a speech that was about maybe 45 minutes, I think, and we streamed it. If you want to look at the Western Standards YouTube or Facebook channels, you'll be able to see it. We streamed the entire thing, and you can see the whole speech. The crowd was something else. I was told by an organizer, I believe the fire capacity of that venue was 5,500 people, and at that point when he talked to me, they figured they had about 4,500 people there. For a leadership rally on a Thursday night in bad weather, that is outstanding, and the atmosphere. And what was interesting was, yes, Poilievre is a very smart man and a good political player. He knows his audience, and he certainly spoke to alienation. You don't hear that out of the federal leaders very often, though. When I tried to get those issues out, when I had Mr. Charest on as a guest on the show, for example, he just didn't want to go there. Poilievre is hitting it straight on. I mean, none of them like to even admit that there might be independence movements in the West. So hearing him acknowledge it, though, of course, he's looking to correct it, and he's looking on a federal point of view. You might have heard that voice yell from the background, so heckler, if you don't do it, we're gone, or something along that mind. I think people are at the end of their rope in the West. There's no doubt about that. We're tired. But Poilievre seems to be inspiring a lot of people. We're watching him come across the West. All of his rallies have been just outright packed. And in central Canada, he's been doing quite well. We'll see how his campaign progresses in the Maritimes and through Quebec. Of course, those are areas. The Conservative Party has a weighted system, riding by riding, for running for the leadership. So even if Poilievre completely sweeps the prairie provinces in the West, it's similar to our federal elections. He's got to win some good support in central Canada and eastern Canada if he's going to win it, though. It doesn't matter if you've got 100,000 people vote for you in a handful of Alberta ridings. You've got to have those votes all the way across the country. Poilievre, again, he's a very effective campaigner. He's got a great deal of momentum. He's certainly got a degree and base of support in central Canada. I mean, it's an Ontario seat. What was refreshing with his speech, because we know they're watching, they're always looking. He was unapologetically conservative. There was no beating around the bush with it. He outright, called to end the carbon tax. Of course, it's going to be popular here, but no BS. Of course, we heard that from the last conservative leader, and he completely flip-flopped on that. So we'll see. But I believe people find Poilievre a lot more believable when it comes to that. Something else interesting is Poilievre brought up the truckers and saying he respects truckers. He didn't say so specifically on the convoy, but he made a point of reaching out and talking about truckers themselves, because that's the point that the defenders of the status quo were using to attack him with. They're mostly saying he was supportive of the convoy. This is a guy who's inappropriate for office and blah, blah, blah. The same old crap. I'm watching the Trump comparisons starting to come up. Here's some of the irony. When you see people spitting out the word populism as if it's a dirty word, they make it a pejorative. Guys, another word for populism is democracy. He's appealing to a large number of people, and they're coming out. And I'm sorry if authoritarians don't like that, but it's a good thing. It's a good thing. He's getting out there and he's listening to people, and he's modeling his policies based on what he's hearing. Or at least, again, now we've been bait and switched many a number of times from federal politicians in the past. I would hope and think that Mr. Poilievre isn't doing the same thing, but he's not trying to pussyfoot around. I'm hoping to get him on the show again. I had him on before. It was a very good interview, but he was very contained. He was being very careful to stay within talking points. I couldn't pull him away from the basics. And I found that with every candidate I brought on, you do have to be careful. It's this world of gotcha politics. It's this world of you say one sentence the wrong way, it gets pulled out of context, and they cancel you. But he's also not trying to put out couch his words or liberal light or things like that. His speech was very direct in commitments for energy and commitments for the West, and in calling out the CBC. That was great. The whole room just erupted in cheers when Poilievre said he's going to defund the CBC. I do feel, I really do, for reporters, the guys who are there, and when you go to these events now, CBC, they used to have they'd wear the CBC jacket, and their camera would have stickers all over, so CBC and their microphone. They were there, but I tell you, there's no branding on their stuff anywhere. And I don't want to see any reporters ever intimidated. We shouldn't do that. I don't care if it's CBC or others, but at the same time, it's good to see that they're learning that the old establishment media is falling by the wayside. People, particularly out here, have absolutely no use for it. And that was one of the most rousing cheers that came throughout the night. Again, I mean, it's funny when you see right or left, when you see populism, a lot of it comes to the same things. He's talking about, he talked about the digital currencies again, and he talked about how that could be a way that we could, what was his term for it? Can't remember now, but something about, keeping money in people's pockets rather than the people with yachts. The good buzzwords. And I mean, he pulled a gentleman out of the audience, brought him on stage, did some spontaneous chatter, if it was indeed spontaneous or incredibly well planned, who knows. But the place was jammed. It was just jammed to the rafters. And I spoke to a few people there. The other thing that was interesting was I was speaking to new political people. I've been playing around these political circles in Alberta for a long time. I'm a political wiener. We know that. I go to these meetings, I do these things, and you see a lot of the same people all the time. Something that I think is going to get the establishment nervous is a lot of the people I ran across at the Poilievre event last night were not the usual suspects. They weren't the usual political players. These were different people who felt inspired to come out and take part in something like this. He's engaging new folks. Oh, there were a whole lot of the usual people there as well, but he's pulling out new ones. And that could be indicative of somebody who, I mean, there's two steps to this. He would have to win the leadership, and then, of course, he'd have to win a general election in order to accomplish anything. But boy, he's got the West excited right now, and we're due for a little excitement. Overall, I think some of it's a bit of a battle in futility. We've talked about that. I think my next guest will be able to cover a little of that. We've got some serious systemic issues in Canada. We've got a much bigger problem than just who's sitting at the helm in the federal government. But it is always better for us, at least when we have a benign person in power in Ottawa versus one who outright doesn't like us. And that's what we've got right now with Trudeau. So we're watching that race develop. And then there's others. It's almost turning into, so far, also Rands. When you look at Brown, when you look at Leslyn Lewis and Charest, he's not setting the world on fire. I mean, this is really a blast from the past, though we can't underestimate them all yet. This is a long campaign. That's part of it too. I mean, they aren't voting until September 10th, and that's an eternity. A whole lot of things can change between now and then. I think they got 10 or 11 people looking to run in that race now so far. The entrance requirements are $300,000, $100,000 of which is a deposit, but still, I got a feeling a good number of those guys aren't actually going to end up on the list whenever that cutoff hits, which I think is in June or something, or maybe May. We'll be down to 4, maybe 5 candidates, and then we'll be able to narrow down. But I think the race will start narrowing at that point too. I mean, especially if one's way out in the lead, they're going to have to work very hard to figure out how to, we'll start to see political battles, whether it's a matter of bringing their own candidacy up to rival Mr. Poilievre or trying to drag Poilievre down. And that's when it starts getting dangerous too, when you can rip your own party apart. A leadership race can be a building exercise for a party. It can be a productive thing. It can be a good thing. But if it goes negative, it can turn into a civil war, and you could end up with a split party at the end of it. And there's nothing that Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh would like to see more than a split conservative option coming at them on the federal front. And, it's been interesting to watch the development too. I see Maxime Bernier has been taking shots at Poilievre. It sounds like Poilievre and his attention he's grabbing in these large rallies and things like that is eating some of Bernier's lunch. And he's feeling a little vulnerable there. That's another aspect going on. And that's what's got to be wondered about this too, though. So this rally was well attended, very high energy in the room. But how much does it represent of everybody else? I mean, Bernier held some very big high energy rallies as well. He held a huge one in Strathmore. He had a big one in Ontario. But a lot of that was all riding on COVID mandates. It was pushing back on that, which people are very motivated to do and get involved with and push back with. But it has a hard ceiling. It represents 10, 15% of the country, which is significant. It's millions of people, but it's not nearly enough to win an election. So again, in the general election, despite being well-funded and having large, well-attended rallies and everything else, the People's Party of Canada wasn't a realistic threat in any single riding in the general election. Is Poilievre reaching out to something more broad than that as he's galvanizing people? Or is it perhaps a small core of enthusiastic ones? We'll see as this develops. But it was quite a rally to attend. Okay, before I get to my next guest, I'm just going to speak one more time of one of our sponsors, and that's the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Again, we want to talk about our rights. We want to talk about standing up for ourselves. One of our areas that's constantly under threat is our right and ability to own, enjoy, trade, whatever you want to do, firearms. And the Canadian Shooting Sports Association is dedicated to making sure you can continue to safely, legally enjoy all of those rights. They have a great deal of resources, as you can see from the pictures. I mean, for trap shooters, for target shooters wanting to go to the Olympics, all sorts of things. They have the videos, the networking. You can meet, like any other association, other firearm owners. And most important of all, they have a number of legal challenges out on your behalf against the federal government, who is constantly recategorizing your property, turning legal firearm owners into criminals, and trying to take your property away from you. They're taking hunting rifles and they're recategorizing them as assault-style weapons, and then they're taking them away. Even if they compensate you, hey, if you didn't have a choice in the transaction, it's not a transaction. It's a theft as far as I'm concerned. But it's going to keep happening if you don't push back, if you don't stand up for yourself. These guys are doing it. They got the legal challenges. They're using the court system, but they need you. You got to join. You got to take out a membership. If you want to protect your ability to keep using and enjoying firearms, join the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. You can get on there, CSSA-CILA.org. Take out a membership and help them keep standing up for you. All right. So let's bring in, just got to get that up there, Rob Anderson from the Free Alberta Strategy, and we'll have a little more independence-minded talk. And I never tire of independence-minded talk. So, hey, Rob, it's good to see you. Good to see you, Cory. How you doing? Oh, good. Ranting, raving as usual. And now I'm finally actually doing it for a living. It's me out the games case a bit. So it's win-win-win.
Good for you. That's awesome. Good to be here today.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. We haven't heard from you in a little bit. I mean, I had Derek Fromm on a little while back, and I also had Dr. or Professor Cooper on. But we didn't quite talk about the strategy, and basically, I'd like to see an update. How are things going with the group? How's it been moving forward since you guys kind of launched last fall?
Oh, it's been great. We've had 14 town halls, Zoom town halls across the province, and we invited supporters from all over all 87 constituencies across Alberta to participate in one of these 14 town halls. We've had about 3,000 people thereabouts attend as we've held these. We try to keep the groups pretty small to allow so that people can ask questions and so forth. So each has been about 100 or 200 or 300 depending on the day. And we've obviously been out there talking to a lot of MLAs. We've had 10 elected MLAs co-host these town halls with us. They're very supportive of various parts of the Free Alberta strategy. And and we're just kind of, I would say, getting to the end of phase one, which was kind of generally introducing the concept to Albertans, and now we're kind of looking at what our phase two should be, which is to see some of these ideas turned into law.
Great. Well, and I guess in a sense, you could have some opportunity coming soon. It was impressive seeing some of the government MLAs who have come out and endorsed or been supportive of this. Well, the government itself isn't necessarily on board, but you'll need them if you want some of those goals to be met, such as the provincial police force or the Banking Act and some of the things you proposed. Which of those do you think the government might embrace? I mean, right now, because they're kind of in the midst of a bit of turmoil, it also makes a lot of people more receptive to embracing some change and different approaches.
Yeah, I know, and it's great. Obviously, Daniel Smith is one of the declared potential candidates here in the potential leadership race. I guess we could say that may be coming up depending on what happens in May. And she's been very supportive of the strategy. So I haven't heard much from Brian Jean on that front. He doesn't seem as supportive, but he's just been more quiet and not wanting to really comment on those issues. So we want to make sure we're very active if this does get into a leadership race, to make sure that our supporters are well aware of who supports this strategy and who doesn't. The most important, I would say, the one that is catching a little bit of fire. I mean, there's lots of supporters of the provincial police force and Alberta pension plan. Those are ideas from the old 2001 firewall letter. But the new idea that has clearly captured people's imagination is the idea of passing an Alberta Sovereignty Act. And this isn't a separation act. It's not a call for separation or passing that type of legislation. What the Alberta Sovereignty Act would do is it would say that it would give the provincial legislature authority to deny enforcement within the province of Alberta of any federal law or court decision that it felt was outside of or interfered with provincial jurisdiction or was an unfair attack on the people of Alberta. And at first, people were saying, well, can we do that? And once we explained that Quebec's been doing this for several years, for several decades, actually, now they do it through their constitution, their National Assembly and so forth, but they are a nation within Canada. That's what they're declared. Ottawa's agreed with that. We need to do the same thing here. And we have the right to do that. We have the right to say, because we control so many mechanisms, so much enforcement in the province, we can say, look, when the carbon tax comes or the Emergencies Act is invoked by the Prime Minister, we can say, you know what, fill your boots, Ottawa. That one is outside your jurisdiction, or it's an attack on Albertans. We're not going to enforce it within the province of Alberta. So you can do whatever you want to us. You can court challenge, you can do whatever you want, Ottawa. We're still not going to enforce it here. And that is what the Alberta Sovereignty Act is all about. It gives us a trump card, so to speak. It gives us a way of not always allowing ourselves to be beat up by these dictates that are coming from Ottawa attacking our province.
So has there been any, as you said, you've been at least somewhat in communication with some of the people. It's such an awkward circumstance we're in, who are potentially vying for a leadership should it become open in the near future. With the incumbent leader, Premier Kenney, has there been any communication with Premier Kenney on this, or would you think there would be if he stays on after this review?
We've attempted to. But Jason Kenney is an avowed federalist, and what that means for him, I think, is that Alberta doesn't really have a right to assert its provincial sovereignty, so to speak, its independence from Ottawa. It can ask, it can cry, it can put billboards up and put trade offices in Ottawa, but it can't really do anything. And he's made it very clear in his comments that he's not really willing to go past, so far he's examined the idea of a provincial police force because that's something that Quebec and Ontario already do. He's examined the idea of a pension plan because that's something obviously that Quebec already does and that we have the right to do here within the Constitution, and within the legislation as it's written now federally on the pension, but the pension plan. However, he hasn't done those things. So he's talk, done nothing. And B, if it is anything that requires, I would say, if it's anything controversial, then he's clearly shown that he's opposed to that. So an example would be the Emergencies Act. When that was invoked, he had an opportunity to do exactly what Quebec did in the same situation, and that is call the legislature, say, put a motion on the table that the Emergencies Act would not be enforced within the province of Alberta, just as Quebec did. And he didn't. He just complained. He said we shouldn't have had to invoke the Emergencies Act. That type of weak leadership is the reason why, one of the reasons, main reasons why Alberta is in the predicament that it is today. We've just had too many leaders that are unwilling to fight for our provincial rights and our people when they're attacked by Ottawa. And I sure hope it changes going forward, but I don't think it'll be through him.
No, and something should be reiterated, and it can't be enough times. And you mentioned earlier, there's nothing you're proposing that isn't being done in other parts of Canada. Like, this has been that frustration since the Alberta Agenda Firewall letter, as it was framed. We were framed as extreme back then for trying to promote such things, but yet we're not asking for anything that another province hasn't already done for itself. I mean, we've got a very valid case to stand up for ourselves and defend these actions, but we just can't seem to get a provincial government with the will to do it.
No, that's exactly it. And people sometimes like to paint it as, like you say, extreme, or that you want to break up the country, this sort of thing. But we have to understand that we have a very dysfunctional country right now. I mean, we have essentially a federal government that has imposed economic sanctions on a couple of its provinces, making it impossible for us to export our most important resource and develop it in the way that is best for our citizens. A. And B, that if we continue down this road, what is the inevitable conclusion? The inevitable conclusion of the way that people like Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh and this type of federalism at all costs, almost a quasi-dictatorial system that they have right now, with Ottawa dictating policy and interfering with every single area of provincial jurisdiction, it's going to lead eventually to the breakup of Canada. So if you want, the biggest threat to Canada, Canadian unity, is sitting in the Prime Minister's chair right now. It's that type of federalism that he's deployed that is the root cause of the disunity that we have in this country. What the Free Alberta Strategy proposes is a strategy that, frankly, every province should be looking at. The idea is here, we need to take, and I will say, Pierre Poilievre, in his speech yesterday, as well as throughout the campaign that I've seen, has been talking about this, the idea that we have to get power out of Ottawa and back to the provinces. And that's the key to saving this country. Is Ottawa is too big, it's completely out of touch, it's completely corrupt and power hungry, and we need to make sure that the power to govern the people within this country is primarily held by the provincial governments. And that means a decentralization of power from Ottawa. And the Free Alberta Strategy really is that. It's taking back as many of our jurisdictional rights as possible, exercising them to the fullest extent possible to ensure that the people of Alberta are actually in control of their own government, their own destiny, not some quasi-tyrants in Ottawa. That's not appropriate, I don't think.
Yeah, well, and there's an irony in the whole concept and the division going on is people who are strongly connected with Confederation don't want to see it split up. They don't want to see a province leave, yet they feel that supporting more centralized government would be the way to force us to be more unified. And they don't seem to understand, if we stay that way, that is a secessionist's best friend. If you keep that intractable status quo that leaves us with nothing but the nuclear option at the end, the path to unity is decentralization, and they just can't seem to get that, though. Like I use Switzerland all the time as an example. 26 cantons, 4 official languages. We can barely manage 2 on a country, much, much smaller. And the reason you never hear of a secessionist movement out of their democracy is because their federal government is exceedingly limited, and they devolve the power to all of those little regions. And there's a great deal of diversity between those regions, but we can't seem to embrace that. We seem to feel if we could just get the feds to crack down hard enough, we'll be unified, and it's backfiring.
Yeah, and that's the thing is people, I think there's a Star Wars quote for those Star Wars fans on that. The tighter your grip, the more things will, the more that things slip through your fingers, and there's that's the problem with this federalism that you're seeing in not only in Canada, I would say, but increasingly so in the United Kingdom and in the United States, where you see these big federal governments continue to grow, continue to balloon, and they're continuing to find ways to interfere with provincial or states' rights. And you see this, like for example, just recently with the new daycare program here federally. Childcare is so clearly a provincial jurisdiction. It couldn't be more clearly a provincial jurisdiction. And yet here we have the federal government coming along with money that they've printed, causing this massive inflation that we've seen, coming with printed money saying, you know what, provinces, we know childcare is your jurisdiction. We understand that. But if you follow our rules, we're going to give you this pile of cash. But that means you're going to have a universal daycare program, and it's going to have to set up this exact way. And this is how it's all going to be run. And we're going to control, we're going to price controls, this, that, and the other thing, and throw out the free market. And you've got to do this if you're going to get this money. Otherwise, you're not going to get the money, and they're going to get free daycare in Quebec. But you in Alberta, you're not going to get free daycare. Now, of course, no one wants to talk about the shortages and the decrease in quality that such ridiculous policies cause in the end. Certainly, Quebec has gone through that and seen that firsthand, and had to basically return to the private sector for help in dealing with the shortages and the lack of quality care. But that's the issue, is that Ottawa, whether it's daycare, whether it's healthcare, social services, property rights with the gun buyback garbage, all that stuff is all designed for the federal government to use money that they've printed in order to take over provincial areas of jurisdiction. And then some they just do outright, like, for example, the carbon tax, the emissions caps, which are clearly a tax on our resource sector and our ability to develop our resources, which is obviously a provincial jurisdiction. So this is what we find ourselves in, and if we don't put a stop to it, it is going to inevitably lead to the breakdown of this country.
Yeah, so you guys have been, as you said, holding on to online town hall meetings and in communication with MLAs, with the government. Have you been in communication with some of the other parties, the Wild Rose Independence parties, things like that? Like, you're not a partisan organization, so have you been reaching out to and communicating with some of the other organizations as well?
We've had 2 of the independent caucus members, Todd Lowen and Drew Barnes, support and endorse the initiative, which is great. I have spoken to it with Paul Hinman, who's the leader of the Wild Rose Independence Party. They don't have any MLAs, so I haven't had discussions with any MLAs in that party. But I think that a lot of the things that they're saying are promoting certain aspects of the Free Alberta Strategy. I have even reached out to the NDP party. I've heard absolute crickets on that, not surprisingly. But I think, Cory, you and I have been through a lot during the Wild Rose days and all, how hard it is to start a new party. My only concern is that I am concerned about a fracture in this party. And I think, the number one cause of such a fracture, frankly, is sitting in the Premier's chair right now. But I do worry that if Conservatives aren't unified on some of these core issues here in Alberta, that we might be taking a huge step back by dividing the vote and seeing the NDP unfortunately win. So my hope is that I do hope that there is a way to keep the Conservative movement generally unified, so that we can move some of these initiatives in the Free Alberta Strategy forward. Because so far the temperature, I would say, is that the Wild Rose supports it, the UCP seems quite supportive of it as well, but other than the leader, but the NDP does not. So if they get into power, I think we're going to have 4 years of nothing happening on the Free Alberta Strategy front, which would be a real shame given how much progress we seem to be making.
Yeah, well, if we get the NDP, and I got a feeling we'll have 4 years of a whole lot of nothing happening on a number of fronts, unfortunately, and that's everybody's biggest fear. We're in such uncharted waters right now. We've never seen anything quite like this. I mean, such a bizarre internal review, and yeah, I mean, everybody's looking at their crystal balls. I don't see how they can come out of this unified unless they change the leadership. That's my view. It's just that even if Premier Kenney wins it, there's going to be a big floor crossing. I mean, there's too many MLAs have crossed the line of no return, too many constituency associations. We're going to have more than one party in the legislature. And yeah, we do all remember how that ended last time. But we will see. I mean, in the meantime, we can't stop promoting and pushing, important policies and initiatives and ideas. So that's what you guys are up there with the strategy. So have you got more events coming in the near future and plans then on promoting the Free Alberta Strategy?
Well, yeah, we polled our members, our folks that had expressed interest in essentially our emailing list, which is about 100,000 people, and they came. We polled them. We said, okay, let's focus down on one or two of the initiatives within the strategy. We've certainly introduced the entire strategy as best we can, giving people kind of a 50,000 foot idea of what it contains. Now, let's go and look at some specific initiatives now and work on those in our next set of town halls and meetings with MLAs and so forth. See if we can get some real legislation passed. Because I mean, obviously, the strategy entails 15 to 20 initiatives. It's pretty hard to ask a government to do those all at once. So let's start somewhere. Let's start somewhere and focus. So we polled our members on that, and we gave them: should we focus on the Alberta Provincial Police Force, Alberta Pension Plan, provincial tax collection, or the Alberta Sovereignty Act, which we talked about earlier? I expected the winner was going to be the provincial police force that had a lot of support on the town halls and so forth. But I was actually shocked to see that about 70% of respondents said that we should be focusing on the Alberta Sovereignty Act. That was by far and away the most popular initiative. So I think we're going to do that. Now, the provincial police force dovetails very closely with that, and it's almost a prerequisite to the Alberta Sovereignty Act working, because if you don't have a police force accountable to Alberta, it's going to be hard to tell Ottawa that we're not going to enforce, for example, a gun registry or something like that in Alberta if they still control the RCMP in rural Alberta, for example. So those are very connected, but I think you'll see us focus a lot more on what we call a notwithstanding clause for provincial rights, which is the Alberta Sovereignty Act, and getting MLAs who also seem very predisposed to the idea, especially in rural Alberta, to get on board with that initiative and get legislation passed in that regard. And at the same time, in doing so, declare that Alberta's withdrawing from the RCMP and will be establishing and transitioning to an Alberta Provincial Police Force in rural Alberta for those who do not already have municipal police forces. So that's what we'll be working on, and we feel very hopeful that we're going to make good progress and see this become a reality.
Great. Well, I appreciate the work you're doing, and just to remind people, where can they go out to find more information on what you're up to and what all those policies are in detail?
You bet. It's freealbertastrategy.com, and you can sign up for the email list there. We put out emails every couple of months updating you on what we're doing. Obviously, you can attend some events. We don't have our next ones planned because we're going through this transition after the first 14. But in the coming month or so, you should see a whole bunch of events posted there. And then, of course, please sign our petition. Obviously, please donate. We're trying to organize these things that have cost. Just please contribute. And most importantly, tell your family, tell your friends, get them out to events, and let's continue the movement.
Great. Well, thank you very much again for coming on today, Rob, and keep up the good work. And we'll check in down the road, perhaps after the leadership. I imagine you guys will be working hard, if indeed there's a leadership race going, to get commitments from the new candidates on pursuing these sorts of initiatives.
We sure will. Thanks very much for having me today, Cory. I really appreciate it.
All right. I'll see you later, Rob. So yes, that was Rob Anderson with the Free Alberta Strategy. And I appreciate, as people know, I've been an independence-minded person for quite some time and working in those political circles. And it has to be a multi-pronged approach. It has to be pragmatic. I've talked about that before with people saying, we want a referendum on independence tomorrow. Hey, so do I, kind of, if I thought we could win it, but we can't. We aren't there. We need to get these incremental moves towards it. I mean, you can look at it two ways. If you want Alberta to stay within Canada, well, as I was saying with Rob, these are the ways we could make it more of a palatable relationship and perhaps maintain the unity within the country by bringing in provincial initiatives for autonomy and strength and distancing ourselves from a federal government that doesn't stand up for our interests. By the same token, if you are still completely committed to full independence, well, these are steps you're going to have to make on the way there anyway. Those are all those question marks that would be hanging. If you held a referendum tomorrow, I could say already, if I was, say, an opponent in that referendum, I wanted to have people vote against Alberta leaving, I'd point out, well, you don't even have a police force yet. You don't have a sovereignty act. You don't know how to get yourself free from the federal government. You aren't collecting your own taxation. You don't have your own pension plan. You aren't ready to go. I can't vote for, and I don't think people should vote for. Careful with what I'm saying here. I'm, playing devil's advocate. You're not ready to leave this nation yet, and it's true. It's true. I mean, I've said it before. I believe that Confederation, the system, is fundamentally broken. It needs constitutional reform, or we're just going to keep going into these battles. But in the meantime, these are things we can do within the system, and it should appeal to people, again, whether you want out or whether you want to improve what we're doing within. These policies are good. They're good ideas. They're things that are overdue, and we got to start pushing them. And I get sick of people being dismissed as being extremists for pushing those sorts of things. As Rob said, it's ludicrous. Quebec does this. Ontario has their own police force. Quebec has their own pension plan. Quebec controls their own immigration. They collect their own tax dollars. Nobody is asking for anything that another province isn't already doing. And that again shows that double standard we live within in Canada when it comes to treatment of the West versus treatment of Central Canada. Claudette Lease asking, how can we reach you besides Twitter? Since I got a question from there. You can email me at cmorgan@westernstandard.news. And as well, if you go onto the site, westernstandardonline.com, you'll see contact information for a number of columnists and people and other individuals. I'm on Facebook, and I've got a page there, of course, and other things. So certainly reach out, and we can talk, more at length on things like that. I appreciate emails coming in, especially guest recommendations, things like that, topics we want to cover. You can always use that feedback. It's very important. Brad Haugen asking, do we need our own police force first? So, it was interesting. Rob talked about that, and they're polling their own members and asking about it. And as he said, with this plan for a sovereignty act, the police are part and parcel. So people wanted that act first, but we got to remember, you're not independent as long as the federal government controls all policing, because they can bring in acts and then direct the RCMP to enforce their will upon us. Whereas if we have our provincial police force, we could tell them to get stuffed. But it sounds like this organization is democratic, so they're going to focus on the other part first. But it would almost be more practical to get the police force first, so that hey, if Ottawa, spend your own bucks if you want to try and enforce this. We're not going to waste our time on it. Somebody else earlier had mentioned the gun grab in High River, for example, when there was a disaster going on. It shows the trustworthiness of our federal government as well, right? Floods like we'd never seen before. The town's underwater. Everybody's evacuated. And the RCMP are out there. What are they doing? They're kicking doors down, doing property damage, stomping with muddy boots across the carpets. But they're not looking to rescue people who were stuck in the houses. They were stealing firearms. And again, they were legal. They were stealing them. And they knew where they were. They won't admit it, but they knew where they were. This registry that supposedly was supposed to be deleted, that was supposed to be gone, the firearms registry that the Liberals tried and failed in the 90s, that spent billions of dollars pushing, was supposed to be gone. There was one case in High River with a fellow who the RCMP broke into his empty house in the floods 3 different times and finally found some firearms this gentleman had. I guess it was in his basement behind some boxes, and took them, stole them. A lot of these people got their firearms back later, but it doesn't matter. When you took it without permission, you weren't doing it for public safety. If you had to go in 3 times to even find them, where you supposedly didn't even know they were there, you had to go rooting behind boxes to get these things. What's your interest? What is your goal? You've been there twice already. There's no pets stranded in there. There's no people stranded in there. And again, you'll never admit that They didn't go into other houses 3 times. They only went into the ones where there were firearms because they knew they were there. So we can't trust the federal government. And no, you can't trust the RCMP. I'm not saying with each and every officer. I'm not saying the next time you get pulled over by an RCMP officer that they're going to violate your rights, or that you shouldn't call them if you live in a rural area and you need police service. There's a lot of fantastic members within the RCMP. It's not the member level that's the problem. It's their bosses, and those bosses are in Ottawa, and they will serve Ottawa's interests. That's what they have to. A provincial police force won't do that. I find it very hard to believe that a provincial police force, if they were the ones managing things in High River during that disaster, would have wasted all that time kicking down doors trying to steal people's legally owned firearms. But they were ordered from the federal government to get in there and take those things. And the federal government now is even worse than the one that was back then. So we do have to change some things. So getting an Alberta provincial police force, I think there's a number of reasons we should be getting one. And that's not the least among them. And, some people have a lot of, I think that's personally, just my guess as to why the polling numbers, and they polled thousands and thousands of people, put changing to a provincial police force, farther down in the priority list than they anticipated. A lot of people have an emotional attachment to the RCMP, to the Mounties, the red surge, the colors always get your man, the good Mountie vision. And the RCMP have done a lot of things, and they've been a very good police force over the decades in the past. But it's changed, guys. It's changed. And just because if we moved away from RCMP doesn't mean all those officers are immediately thrown out of work. Who's to say a lot of them won't apply and join the Alberta Provincial Police Force? I mean, they don't just spring out of the ground like daisies. You got to get officers, and having some pre-trained ones that would just need new training to a degree, updating or something. Well, that's the logical route. So these officers aren't going to be thrown to the wayside. They will have an opportunity to change forces that they're working with. So don't worry about the emotional attachment. The RCMP would still be there, at least as long as Alberta's still within Canada. They'd just be a federal force. Why not? The Americans do that. The FBI doesn't deal with local policing in the States. It makes sense. It's the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They deal with larger issues that impact the entire country. They leave policing to the states and the counties and that to deal with. It's not a perfect system, but it keeps the FBI from overwhelming entire states. Again, I mean, they're very much more individual rights and independence minded. If the Americans tried to have a police force as overwhelming and as intimidating as the RCMP is in Canada, I don't think the American citizens would put up with that for a minute. So, but again, getting back to what they're going to push with the strategy to begin with, and as they've asked, is the Alberta Sovereignty Act. And that's a new move. And I like where that's going. This is something different. This is something that does move away from the old Alberta agenda, or firewall letter as it's known, and that we still pursue those things. But this is a different legislative tool and a different move to go into detail on ways that the province can distance itself from federal control within Confederation. Again, you can look at that as whether that's a step on the way out the door or a way to make sure that the door doesn't have to close. But I want to see the more the better as far as I'm concerned. And I don't think anybody looking towards independence, I mean, I don't think a full-out secessionist party is the way to go. Parties are tools. They're different. And they could bring in policies and they could do other things. But the realm of independence and pushing towards that has to be ground level groups. What the parties should be doing, though, is giving us the mechanisms. And that's one of the things, again, where Jason Kenney fell short. We should have a realistic, binding citizens initiative legislation policy, a mechanism where people, if you petition enough with a certain amount of signatures required over a certain period of time, it's like recall. You can't make it too easy, or people be, trying to hold a referendum on where their neighbor's dog craps or something like that. But you got to make it achievable, and you got to say it's binding. And then the government can raise their hands. They don't have to say that we are secessionists or we're looking for put Alberta independent. But if enough Albertans came out and said, we're initiating that referendum, the government said, we're respecting their rights. That's the legislation we gave them. That's what we're going to do. And it's up to Albertans from that point. It gives the government an out, some irresponsibility. Hey, a lot of them kind of like that anyways, in a sense. Let's avoid getting in trouble with things. So, this legislation, this initiative, I really kind of like where they're going. And again, it doesn't look like Premier Kenney would go for that Alberta Sovereignty Act. I mean, we can't even really get him to move on his fair deal panel recommendations. but the lifespan of Jason Kenney's leadership with the party looks like it might be very limited, and there might be some opportunities to get some commitments from people who might be forming the next government to bring in some of these changes. So I like where they're going with that strategy. Some people have mentioned the Alberta Prosperity Project, same sort of thing. The more we can push, the more we can engage citizens, the more we can move towards that, I think the better we will all be. I'm going to speak one more time on, let's talk about getting our money out of federal hands, and that's through our sponsors, and that's with bitcoinwell.com. I want to remind you of these guys. Getting back to what we were talking about, as you can see about Bitcoin Well, and they break it down on their site quite well with who they are and what they're about. It's a non-custodial. It's a term they use a lot, which means your funds are safe. You're never giving them to somebody else and trusting them to somebody else and hoping they're going to do something on your behalf. These guys guide you through the process. They instruct. They have Bitcoin Academy that they set up, or as you can see, buy Bitcoin in person. How do you feel more safe than that? See, that's part of where's the digital world. You're dealing with somebody across the continent or across the planet. These guys do one-on-one. You can be face-to-face with a real person in person. As well, if you're not in one of the major cities, you could do it through a Zoom meeting, but you will interact with a real live person and they'll answer your questions and see if Bitcoin's for you. These consultations, it might not be for everybody, but they'll help lead you through it so you can safely get your funds into a different area, savings plans, bill payments. They make it practical. They bring these digital currencies home to something you can understand and be comfortable with. We set that up here with the Western Standard. There's a corporate plans they do. I've talked about that before. A portion of my salary every month goes into a Bitcoin ledger that they helped me set up. And I get a little bit of savings off to the side, and the Western Standard matches that. These guys can set that up for your place of employment as well and get that rolling. They'll help you along with it. So check them out, bitcoinwell.com. They are a fantastic sponsor, and they've been doing a lot of good for us so far. So let's see some more in the comment area. Yeah, some people had high hopes for Kenny, and he never quite got there. I mean, it's and we've had some other columns, and I had Brett Wilson on earlier this week, and he spoke. He's supportive of Jason Kenney. We had Shane Wenzel speaking out, and he wrote a column as well, quite supportive of Premier Kenney. It's not over. There's a lot of people want a change in the leadership of the party. There's no doubt about that. We'll see if it happens, but there's some people who want him to stay. It is a race. They got a lot of ground to make up. It's just a little over a month away now before all those votes are going to be tabulated, this mail-in ballot thing, and I hope it's not too much of a mess. As I said, I've dealt with mail-in ballots, and they're a pain. They can have a lot of logistical challenges. Getting back to reminding everybody. So as well, we're going to discuss more of those things tonight. We'll be recording it, and it'll be running tonight with the pipeline. We do that weekly show. So Dave Naylor and Derek Fildebrand and myself will all go on. We're going to break down some more of those issues and talk about those things. And something else to look forward to. As I said, Danielle Smith's going to be coming on Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. She's starting this next Monday here. And so it's going to be a half hour on those 3 days. And then on Saturdays, she's going to do deep dives with a 1.5 hour live interview of a guest. And I'm really looking forward to that. Like I said, some people have had some beefs with Danielle's political activities in the past, but she's not afraid of hitting everything head on and addressing things and talk to them. There's your opportunity then. Get on those shows, get on the comment scroll, hopefully be polite, but you can ask Danielle about her questions. I thought she was fantastic in media. I talked about that before. I mean, I was as furious as anybody with the floor crossing. I was very critical. It took years before we were all kind of talking to each other again. But she was just, I thought, magnificent radio. That was the tail end of Good Talk Radio. We haven't had Good Talk Radio in Alberta now since Danielle left it. And I mean, the old days of Rutherford and Weisbeck and Peter Warren and some of these great hosts. I mean, John Gormley is still out in Saskatchewan. He's really good, but he's probably going to retire eventually. This is the future, guys. Digital platforms. This is where we can talk unrestrained. This is where we can have discourse. This is where we can go back and forth. And Danielle was very good on talk radio, and she's going to be really good on the shows here with the Western Standard. So another reminder there, as you can see, hey, if you haven't taken out a membership already, get on there, take out a membership, take out a subscription. That's how we can keep expanding these shows, getting more content, so you don't have to torture yourself with all that crappy talk radio that's out there on the decline. We appreciate those who have already. Use that coupon code TRIGGERED. Save yourself some bucks. As I said, this weekend, I'm going to be on again tomorrow, but this Friday and Saturday, there is a firearms show. It's in Calgary. It's the big one. It's the big annual one. It's being held in the, I think it's the Seven Chiefs Sportplex it's called, and it's down on the Sutina Reserve there. It's a very big, hundreds of exhibitors and things like that. If you like firearms, or you're interested in firearms, that's the place to go. Plus the Western Standard is going to be there. I'll be there all day Friday, and there'll be others there on Saturday. So check us out there. And tomorrow I'm got one guest I know is Dr. Monty Gosh, and we're going to talk to him. He's a specialist in addiction treatment. And I just want some extended discussion. It's always been an issue I've talked about a lot. I've always been concerned about. And as we're seeing, in BC, some of those numbers, they're getting 6 deaths a day in BC from overdoses. 6 a day. That's how bad it is over there. And Alberta's not far behind it. We've got a really, really big problem. We're all fighting like hornets all the time over how to deal with it, whether it's supervised consumption sites or legalized drug provision or having more treatment or police intervention. I got a feeling it's a little bit of a mix of everything. But Dr. Gosh, that's his specialty. His goal is presumably just to get people off of those drugs and functional society. I'm really looking forward to that discussion with him. It's going to be a good talk. And there'll be a lot of other discussion and ranting going on tomorrow as well. So thank you all for tuning in today, guys. I appreciate it. And I will see you all tomorrow again at 11:30 a.m. sharp.